This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
There's a certain amount of improvisation within it and dynamic and a very live thing. And that was as impossible as it was to record in that cabin, in that situation. I don't know that we would have gotten that vibe in a recording studio. I don't know that everyone would have been as comfortable just sitting around in a circle without having like the log cabin vibe.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is JJ Blair, a native Chicagoan who came up playing blues and reggae in clubs as a teenager in his hometown before eventually moving to Los Angeles to begin his recording career. Known for taste, musicality, and proficiency in a broad range of musical styles, JJ has also amassed a great collection of vintage microphones, outboard gear, and instruments, which he draws on to make outstanding records and productions. He produced and mixed the Grammy-winning record Press On by June Carter Cash, engineered on the Grammy-winning and #1 Billboard Hot 100 record Great American Songbook Volume 3 by Rod Stewart, as well as engineering on P. Diddy's #1 hit, All About the Benjamins. Right on. JJ has been a producer and engineer since 1994. His clients, credits, and list of musicians he's recorded includes a huge list, but I narrowed it down a little bit. Jeff Beck, George Benson, the Black Eyed Peas, Body Count, Joe Bonamassa, John Brion, Johnny Cash, June Carter Cash, David Cassidy, Kelly Clarkson, Vinnie Colauita, Double Trouble, Peter Erskine, Melissa Etheridge, Jason Falkner, Josh Freese, Jim Keltner, Roger Manning, Keb Mo, Zigaboo, Modeliste. How do I say Zigaboo's last name?
Modeliste, I think.
Modeliste. Bernard Purdy, Smokey Robinson, the Pointer Sisters, Rod Stewart, Tommy Stinson, Marty Stewart, Weezer, Whiskey Town, and Edgar Winter, to name just a few of the many bands that JJ has worked with and the artists And JJ mainly works from his personal recording studio, Fox Force 5 Recorders. I like that, man. Is that like a reference? I think of what's the puppet animated series on TV?
No, it's actually a reference to Pulp Fiction, which came out when we were building the studio. And it's Uma Thurman's character saying that she was in that pilot called Fox Force 5. And
Nice.
I thought, man, that would be a great band name. I don't know any bands who need names, but I have a studio that needs a name, and it's stuck. And the coincidence was, so that was, I think, 94 we came up with the name, and then it was I think 98 or 99 when I did June Carter Cash's record, and she had a song on it called Tiffany Anastasia Lowe about her granddaughter, Tiffany, who was obsessed with Quentin Tarantino. And the song is basically about Pulp Fiction. So I'm like, oh, this brings this all full circle now.
Yeah, nicely done.
Right.
So I'll finish this intro real quick so we can continue on that one. But yeah, just the last bit. You ready? Are you ready for it, JJ? Big thank you to William Whitman for making our introduction. Thank you, William. And please welcome JJ Blair to Recording Studio Rockstars. JJ, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I have my foot up on the wedge, and I am ready to rock.
Nice.
Baka!
If I was to ask you how many of your records you would consider rock records, how would you break up the genres of music you have created into percentages?
Wow, that's it's funny because I consider myself, a rock player who can do a bunch of other things, but man, it's hard to say. I think I started out doing a lot more rock, and I just don't do as much anymore. So I don't know. And and in terms of entire records, if you become sort of a yeoman engineer, a lot of the time you're not necessarily doing complete records. You're doing sessions, you're doing songs, and especially these days because there's no record budgets, so no one's just going in and locking out a studio for a month and making a record. Everything's kind of done in bits and pieces. So I don't know. I mean, I hope that at least 40% of everything I do is rock. But,
at least 40%. I love it. It's that 51% is always that magic number, right?
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the thing. I'm a rock centric person in terms of the way the music that I listen to and the sounds that I'm influenced by and that I go for. However, when I work on heavy stuff, man, I feel beat up, and I'm glad. Like I'd rather do like Americana for the rest of my life than like hard rock. Like Joe Barresi is a friend of mine, and Joe specializes in really heavy, loud rock. Jay Rustin is another guy, and I don't know how they do it because I do like 5 days of that stuff, and I'm just like beat up.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of a young man's game. I feel that way sometimes. I mean, I still love to rock, but I don't crank up the car stereo for quite as long as I used to.
Well, particularly when you're tracking and you're sitting in a pair of, you're sitting in front of a pair of, medium range, medium range monitors.
Yeah.
And it can and you have to have, that's a certain music that you have to work on at a certain volume because you have to feel a certain impact from it. And I can do jazz and, other stuff a little quieter and get away with it. But rock, especially if someone's tracking, they want to feel the fire there.
Yeah. And talk about a genre where somebody might want to do something over and over and over again too. You know, I feel like rock records invented that, the many takes. One of the things that I found myself doing was always having a pair of gun earmuffs around, and I just, get the guitar tone, then just put these huge earmuffs on because you're right. I mean, we're sitting so much closer to the speakers than the guitarist is, even if they're overdubbing in the control room.
There's a producer I work with who listens very, very loudly. And rather than that, I bring my own headphone setup, and I bring a closed back system, and I will listen through that, but a lot quieter. It blocks out enough so that I can still listen, because he listens at punishing volumes.
Punishing volumes. That could be the name of your. I don't know. That sounds like the name of a book. Let me reference something else. So it wasn't in your bio, but as I was doing a little more research on you, pertaining to your ability to rock, tell me if this is accurate or not. You played keyboards for The Who in 2006.
For a gig, yes.
That's good enough for me, man. You get infinite rock credibility right there.
I woke up the next day and I had a Wikipedia page. It was the weirdest thing.
That's where I found it.
It was like, it was weird. But yeah, it's The Who. Most of the time are my favorite band. So, it's hard to have like one favorite band all the time, but most of the time they are my favorite band. So that was a thrill for me.
All right. So we'll stick to keyboards and rock for just a moment. One of the videos that I found of yours was Casualties of Jazz, The Wizard, a cover. And it's somebody's playing. I don't think that's you. I think you're sitting in the video, but I think somebody was playing a great sounding Hammond.
Yes.
And I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about that session. Sure. and even just talk about like what instrument it is that sounds so great. Which Hammond is that? How do we get a sound like that? And how would we even record it if we wanted to do that?
Well, here's the history on Casualties of Jazz really quickly in a nutshell. The rhythm section and I were working on one of the Rod Stewart Great American Songbook, whatever those things were. And in between takes, the bass player started playing Sweet Leaf on the upright, and the drummer fell in on the brushes. And I had the good sense to hit record, and I just played with it and came up with this idea of like, hey, we should do a whole record of this. And they recruited Chris Golden on bass and Jimmy Paxson Jr. on drums. They recruited their friend Matt Rohde, who's a keyboard player that they used to do a lot of gigs with. And we made that record in 3 days, all to analog, because that was at a time that I felt digital was really lacking. So I just sort of put it out, and it got a life of its own. And then we made a follow-up record that I'm almost finished with, that COVID's kind of got in the way of me getting it together. But I don't play on the first record because it's just a Hammond upright and drums trio. The second record, we moved to like 70s funk fusion land, so I'm playing guitar on that.
Nice.
And that video, a lot of wah-wah. That video you found is us at Vintage Keyboard. Forgot. I think, is it just called Vintage Keyboard? They invited us to come and do a little show there. And so there's one thing of us doing the music with me playing guitar, and then the band was like, well, just sit around and introduce us for the other ones and look like you're into it. So that's why I'm sitting around chair dancing while they play. And that Vintage Custom Keyboards, I think that's it. So or Custom Vintage Keyboards. Geez, I'm gonna get this wrong, and then they're gonna be mad at me. But you can you can put a link in,
there we go
in the thing, and we'll get it right. So so they're really fantastic vintage keys repair and customization place. So they had a really great Hammond there. And then the one on the record is my late 40s Hammond CV, which I modified to be easier to play and have a lot of the features of the B3, but can do something that the later ones can't, which is go into a type of overdrive if you intentionally miswire it.
So a lot of the overdrive Hammond we might have heard is a miswiring to get that kind of heavy distortion?
On the Casualties of Jazz record, some of it is. And to be technical for a second, if you flip the polarity on the scanner, it for some reason it overdrives, and I just made a switch that does it rather than having to go behind and change the lug spades every time I wanted to do that.
Wow.
So, and I discovered it just by accidentally flipping the polarity one time when I was doing some maintenance, and then was like, oh, what's that sound? It's instant John Lord. And people have always been doing various modifications to get things to drive like that, and some Hammonds just are really hot too.
Now, would this work potentially on another Hammond? I think mine is the M101 as opposed to the B3.
No, that circuit's only they stopped that circuit in the late 40s. Then they went to the B2, the C2, and I don't think that they changed the scanner, so I don't think it works on that.
Oh, okay.
But there's ways to change different tube values to make things drive harder and whatnot.
What are some ways that you like to record a Hammond organ? You do jazz stuff, you do rock stuff. How much does that make a difference?
Okay. So the Leslie is a very stereo amplifier because it's spinning, it's chorusing, there's a lot of left to right motion. So the question for me is it prominent? Do I want to sit it up front in the mix? Am I putting it somewhere? Do I, want to have it stereo? Do I want to be able to pan it? Is it going to be in mono? So that sort of depends. On Casualties of Jazz, what I did is I did MS on the horn, mid-side technique, where you have a cardioid mic pointing directly at the center of the horn, and then you have a figure eight pointing sideways, which you then molt and flip one side out of phase, or 180 degrees out of phase, and then you split those hard right and left. So what happens is you get a perfect left to right and a dead center. So the benefit of that is if you collapse to mono, you lose the sides, but the mono is still there. So those are 100 degrees out of phase, but the mono is still always there. And you don't get some of that weird mid-range cancellation that you can get sometimes when you have a spaced pair or something like that. And it's very dead up the center. So on that record, because the Hammond was the focal piece, I went with that. A lot of the times what I'll do, and then I just did like a mono whatever on the low baffle. What I tend to do now is I will put mics outside the louvers at 90 on the two corners, 90 degree. I don't do opposite each other. I do like on the corners of the same side. And the louvers help to reduce the wind. I may put a piece of tissue over it too. And here's another fun thing you can do with your masks, by the way. If you have like an RE20, if you have an RE20 on like the baffle, you can put a surgical mask over it, and it makes a great wind baffle. I discovered this in one of the last records I did.
That's funny.
But
we just talked about that on the last interview about how I discovered somebody's voice sounded a little bit better if they didn't take it off, and I felt terrible about suggesting that.
Was it somebody with a lisp?
No, it was just the sibilance on the mic.
I know I'm saying.
Totally.
When you have someone who talks like that, it could be really helpful.
Yeah, totally.
Wayne Newton or yeah. So I'll on something like that, I'll just do a stereo pair on the corner, 90 degrees facing in towards each other, and that gives me a really great stereo image and seems to collapse okay. And I pan those hard left and hard right, and then it's just about, what does that Leslie sound like? What does the Hammond sound like? And that's always, it's not like you can just switch out Leslies and Hammonds for another one because there's usually only one.
Right. With so many fantastic iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all the iZotope plugins through their new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. What about the mic choice? I mean, how important is it that we're using small diaphragm, large diaphragm condensers, ribbons, 57s?
Okay. For me, it's got to be something that, let me see. I'll use 414s a lot, for instance, on the horn. And then I was at another studio and I don't remember what I was using on it, but it just wasn't sitting. I think whatever 414s they had, it just wasn't sitting right in the mix. So it just had a little scooped sound and it was missing some of the meat of the note that I wanted. So I changed it out for like an 87. I'm sure that you can use a 57 or whatever, and EQ is your friend. For me, everything is always context dependent, and that's what I think a lot of people who are learning how to record don't really understand, is that it does not matter at all what something sounds like on its own. It's only and always about what does it sound like in the context of everything else. And are you hearing the parts you want to hear, and are you not obscuring things on other instruments or vocals that you need to hear with that? So, you go to battle with the army you have. So sometimes you're in a situation where you just look around. It's like, okay, ideally I would like this. How do I make these Chinese mics work that I'm not crazy about, but I can do something with it? And so that to me is always the most important thing. I have a ton of mics, and a lot of the times I'll bring stuff to studios if they don't have what I want, just because I know it's going to make my life easier and I can get the results I need quicker, because I know what to expect. But you sort of need to be flexible and work with whatever's there and learn how to tame whatever issues it might crop up.
All right, I'm glad you brought up having a ton of mics. So I'm actually redoing my studio now, and I'm trying to neaten and organize. And I started looking up and researching, hey, what's the best choice for storing your mics? And boy, did I get a variety of responses, all kinds of stuff. What do you feel like you've learned about, I don't want to say the best, but a clever way or a smart way to manage and store a lot of microphones if you have a bunch? If you have more than you need for your studio, what's a good way to keep them so that you got them quickly when you need them, but they're treated well and they're, maybe not all boxed up, or maybe they are, I don't know.
Years ago, I was at what was then Avatar, and I think it's Power Station again. And I was, in their mic room, and I noticed that they had all the mics hanging on dowels on the wall in a very nice, organized fashion. And because they were using quick clips, and which is weird. By the way, can I mention?
Sure.
Why is it when I go to Nashville, nobody uses quick clips there? That is just like, there's just something. Is that just like a Nashville thing?
Well, when I was in school, that was kind of the only time I ever even saw quick clips. And it was suggested in school that quick clips were cool, but people didn't really use them because the mics got dropped too many times.
Yeah, no, that's you have to train your assistants to check them to make sure that they don't drop. But yeah, they
Maybe we
can
just have
drop.
too many people coming and going from too many environments in Nashville.
Exactly. But anyway, so I like quick clips, and they make my life easier. And I've had, you know, a bunch of. I used to own a rehearsal studio, and one of the things that would happen was the threading on the stands would strip all the time too, and that's a drag.
Yeah.
So quick clips are great. Not only are they fast, they help prevent that. And if you have the mics on quick clips, you can use a half-inch dowel and hang the mic on the quick clip. And then what you should do, especially if it's I only do this with my condenser mics, but I put a plastic bag over it to keep dust from gathering on the capsule.
So essentially, that solution is one that says as long as you got a lot of wall space, you can have lots of dowels, and then each mic has a dedicated quick clip, and it just
I have
just
one
slides
little
around
cabinet that holds them all, and I have a ton of mics, and they're basically all in there. You know, except for like my D19s and 57s and stuff like that. I use little cases that are made, the ones with the little circular holes in them that hold stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt like a challenge with mics is if it's a little too much of a pain to put it together, you just won't use it on a session.
Yep.
You know, so I always felt like I should keep the tube mics on stands ready to go, or else we were just never going to use them.
And Pelican cases are ridiculously expensive. I mean, I would have to spend thousands of dollars on Pelican cases to put everything in its own Pelican case. And I'd rather just do something else.
Have you seen anybody else do a clever job of storing mics if they don't have quick clips?
Yeah, there's I think Blackbird has drawers and shelves, you know, like mailbox slot type
So
things.
it's a dedicated room, in other words, too.
Yeah. You know, but you can have that in a live room too. You can just have a wall that has, but there's a lot of studios where you just see shelves and mailbox slots and things like that. But some of the studios that, you know, because they have to keep transporting from the tech shop where the mics live to, which, you know, the multiple rooms in the facility, they will use cases, because it helps to transport them and make sure that they're taken care of.
Right. You might have like one of those carts you see in school where they wheel in the AV, you know, the film strip for today's class.
Right.
And you just pile your mics on it. What about things like humidity? How concerned should we be in our studio about humidity for mics and things like that?
I think it really depends. I mean, I have one of my favorite mics is an M49 that came out of George Benson's studio in Maui. So there was definitely some humidity there, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But the thing about Neumann capsules is they actually have a little hole that you can't see that helps mitigate the humidity. I think it really depends. I'm in LA. It's not too humid. I haven't really had to deal with it. I think the issue for humidity has more to do with if you have sorry to get technical here, if you have a center terminated capsule, like you would have in a U47 or a U67 or a U87, and you're going to get breath moisture on it, and it's dirty, you're going to short between the edge and the center termination. So if your mics are properly attended to and you're not having dirty capsules, humidity shouldn't be as much of an issue. But you know, humidity can kill everything. You know, I feel for anyone who has to keep a studio in New Orleans and try to keep things working.
Right. I did lose a U67 capsule to that very thing. And I was told, so Bill Bradley has the mic shop here in Nashville, and I was told by him that just the voice and, you know, the moisture of the breath over time can make the capsule short out in the way you described. And so we replaced the capsule and it sounds great now, but it started doing a weird, it's like almost like a thumping dropping out effect or something.
That's the current arcing across that. And and once that shorts, you lose signal. There are ways to clean that without damaging it. And then some people that would rather just replace it so they can charge you to replace it, you know?
Well, it sounded great when it was done, so I wasn't complaining too much. But it was recommended to have like one of those, what do they call them? Decusant, or the little dry packs, you know, in the mic box with the mic. Yeah. And on a side note, I learned recently that for the guitars in the studio, it was smart to keep the humidity between 45 and 50 steadily all year if possible. So I ended up
particularly with
getting a humidifier. Yeah.
Yeah. Acoustics can really have bad things happen to them when it gets too dry.
Yeah. And I don't know how resilient the piano soundboard is, but I imagine that can also crack.
I have I keep a dehumidifier system on my piano. It's like a little heater that sort of senses the humidity, and it just kind of helps keep it stable. But yeah, it when you're going from, you know, with wood, when you're going from moist to dry, it expands and contracts, and eventually if it gets, you know, if it goes through that process too many times on its way to drying out, it'll break. And I've seen some guitars, some acoustic guitars in Arizona that are in bad shape because of that. And I try to keep a humidifier near my acoustics for when I have to run the central heating, because that's where they get damaged. I'm not so, you know, we don't get so humid here that I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, that the humidity will also play with the nitrocellulose lacquer and do weird things with that.
I'm just glad you got to say nitrocellulose lacquer.
I've been spraying it for the last couple of days, and I think my IQ dropped a couple points.
Good. Well, then we're a good match now, finally. Okay. I was afraid you were going to outsmart me. Tell us more about Fox Force 5 recorders, FFFR. What is your space? Are you sitting in it now? And if so, what do you see? Right. What do you see around you?
So I'm sitting at the console, which is a Malcolm Toft and Associates Series 980, which is that got used on, I believe Radiohead used one on OK Computer and Kid A.
Wow.
And it's basically after he left Trident, he started another company. It's basically a transformerless version of the Series 80, with some more bells and whistles, but they were able to build it a lot less expensively and give you all the features, the full features of a console. What happened was I bought this house in the mid 90s, and it had an in-law apartment, you know, like a bedroom and a den and a little kitchenette, and I thought it was perfect footprint to build a studio.
Did it come with an in-law, or was it empty?
No, it came with an outlaw.
Okay, good.
And someone turned me on to Brett Teeney, who had designed Paisley Park, and Bob Mar. And the reason that I reached out to him in particular, because he did Bob Clearmountain's home place.
So cool.
This was the good guy to design it. And it's you know, it's not large. And the idea in the mid 90s was everybody had a record deal. I mean, like all my friends had record deals, and, you know, like a small budget for a major label record was $125,000. And if you were on an indie, you had to deal with how to make a record on $40,000, you know,
right.
Like that was like, you know, and so the idea was I wanted a room for myself. But my friends could go do their tracking at Ocean Wave for $2,500 a day, which probably like the rate at the time, 2000, and then just come over here and do your overdubs and use my guitar collection and instrument collection and all that. But before I knew it, a lot of my friends were losing their deals, and it would be like, hey, they won't give us any more money to finish the record because they don't hear a single. Can we work with you? And I'm like, and I needed credits. So before I knew it, we were tracking entire bands here, which was not the original concept because then I have to take over the rest of the house. And it's the thing that anyone who's been doing this for a long time knows. You start with a little bit of stuff, you do a project, you get some money, and you go, man, I really would have loved to have one of those on this record. And I have some money now, and I could pay my insurance, but I could also go buy this microphone. That's how we roll. So, and then next thing you know, it's 25 years later, and you have walls and walls of outboard gear and microphones.
Not to mention the weirdo percussion instruments you end up grabbing.
Yes.
Like, oh, of course I need jingle bells. Gonna use them all the time.
Fiber slap.
Fiber slap.
It's very important.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. The Toft console, that's cool. Those are some great sounding records. What are some of the records? Do you want to give a shout out to any of your own records made on that where you really sort of enjoyed the way that console sounded on it? And I'll see if it's in our Spotify playlist.
Here's the way I used to roll back in tape day. That the idea was, because I was, I was one of those people who was indoctrinated into the like, oh no, man, you got to use all the discrete electronic stuff. And, there was the, so I would track everything through outboard gear and basically just mix on the console, even though I really liked the sound of the way guitars recorded on that console, but I really liked it for mixing. And so I used it basically for mixing. And, that Casualties of Jazz record is a really good example for me of what mixing on that console sounds like. There's a thing to the Trident EQ. There's like that 3K bite that it's sort of recognizable when you hear it's either, and even though they're different circuits, the idea was the same, what they were going for. So even if it's an A range or a B range, which are fully discrete, or you're going to the Series 80, or you're listening to something that was done on a Sound Techniques that Trident stole their design from, there's a certain bite to it that you can hear from, like, going anywhere from Ziggy Stardust to Queen to Supertramp to whatever, and there's just a sound that I can recognize. I'm usually like, wow, that was probably recorded here or there.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember my first exposure to a Trident, I think it was an ADB at a studio here. And I remember just thinking it really had this I hesitate to use the word hard, but it had like a hard as in tough, upper mid-range and clarity in the top end. Like it wasn't gonna collapse on you. It was gonna punch right through if you wanted it to. No,
it's bitey, and it brings out texture in a way that is so much of how I like to hear things. I mean, Helioses do it great, but Helioses aren't very flexible. There's, you only have a couple EQ options on that, and you can do that thing, but the Trident always delivers that, and then you have much more flexibility in terms of your EQ, and then so, and that's a sound that I really like. I like a forward aggressive sound, particularly for something driving. I don't I don't like things to sound woolly, and I've had issues with that where where I don't get to choose the mastering guy, and I know that's their taste in certain things, and I get it back. I'm like, why do we have to use him?
Right.
Where'd all that nice bite go?
Yeah, well, I'm sure if you don't have a toughness and an edge to what you do, you maybe don't get called up on stage to join the Who playing keyboards either.
Well, that was a total fluke. That had nothing to do with that. Was simply here's the story with that. My friend Brion Kehoe has been their keyboard tech for many years, and he wrote this. He and his friend Ryan made this book called Recording the Beatles, which is this amazing in-depth analysis of Abbey Road and every Beatles recording. And he had to do a book release party during that tour, and he didn't want to farm out his gig to somebody who would try to steal it. And he knew that I was responsible and a major Who fan, so he asked me if I would just want to do his gig for a couple shows. And I was like, sure. And then the keyboard player's wife became ill right before the tour. He canceled the tour. They upgraded Brion to play keyboards on the tour. And then thinking that, because he's heard me play keyboards on some stuff, he thought I could play keyboards, which is only partly true. and I'm not going to say no. So, I had 2 weeks to kind of become passable. And then, I wasn't subjected to a rehearsal or a sound check. So I just had to get up and go and make the best of it. And most of it was Hammond, and Hammond's more about, especially in rock, it's more about dynamics and moments rather than being a virtuoso.
Right.
So I was able to bring what that required. But that's the story with that. It was a total fluke. It was you're at the right place. It's like it's most people's careers that have gone anywhere. Be at the right place at the right time, and be prepared.
Did you try and smash the Hammond near the end of the show?
No, I did not.
Well, let's see. Let's talk about some other right place and right time. Tell us about doing P. Diddy's It's All About the Benjamins, which was a lot of fun to go listen to again. Oh, and then also very quickly, Rockstars, I have a playlist. Maybe I mentioned this already. I'll do it again. Playlist in the show notes. So just scroll through if you're on your phone, or click over in the show notes description. It'll take you to the blog post. And there's a playlist of JJ's records there, which includes the one we were just talking about, and I don't want to butcher the title, that was mixed on your console. It was the Casualties of Jazz.
Kind of Black.
Yes. So please go check that out.
Which is available on Bandcamp, and I even have vinyl of it. That sounds pretty amazing.
Anyway, all right, right on. Now I'll shut up for a minute and I'll let you tell that story.
So one of my best friends was playing drums in Tommy Stinson's band Perfect, Tommy from the Replacements, in the mid-90s. And he called me up and said that, whatever, that I guess they had done like a version of All About the Benjamins, but now they were going to do the rock remix, which is what became the single, which became the big hit. And they were having a bunch of different bands take a spin at it, and would I be willing to, work on it with them? And so they came over, and Bad Boy Records sent us a 24-track reel, 2-inch reel, with whatever we needed on it. And then we just went to work on it. And Tommy came up with that lick that became the hook of the song. That's sort of very reminiscent of Hey Bulldog.
Nice.
But that was the thing. And then, but here was the funny thing. So whatever we did became the majority of that single when they mixed it in finale. And Billboard, I don't know if I haven't looked at Billboard for years, but it used to be they would have a page that would have the number one records, and then under it would say the studio that it's done at, what machine it was worked on, what type of tape you used, and then who engineered it. And they were like, and there were like 3 engineers mentioned, and I was not one of them. And I was so pissed off because I wanted like, to frame that and have that nice thing.
It's all about the credits.
It's all about exactly. Yeah. But with them, but the way that, there's a reason, P. Diddy's so wealthy, because it's, the way he pays, it's like it's more about the Hamiltons than it is about but
that's great.
And then none of us got gold records either. It was like, even when we tried to buy them for ourselves, they would not approve it. It was such a jerk off.
What a hilarious thing. It's like when I won a Grammy for my studio and I called them up and I was like, hey, we just won a thing. And they were like, yeah, just send in $50 and we'll send you a piece of paper. I was like, great, I'll do it. Absolutely.
I know it's good I love those certificates. And you know what? I just talked about this with a friend of mine, because her husband has God knows how many gold records and Grammys and stuff like that. And he does, and then she has a ton of stuff herself too. And he doesn't like to put that out. And he has like a gazillion of those pieces of paper with the gold leaf on it. And she keeps saying, like, look, when people come over and they see that, they're impressed and they are more likely to listen to you and take you seriously. And I as much as I hate to say it, there is a psychological factor to that. I keep a Grammy trophy upstairs on my mantle, and in the studio I keep the two certificates, just so it actually, people listen to you a little more closely.
Well, I think it's a good reminder too that the way you just said it, it reminds me that we owe it to the people we're trying to help by including those things, because it actually, if it makes somebody in the studio feel better about being in the studio, feel like if it makes them feel slightly elevated with their music, then great. Who cares what I think about it,
Exactly. And I'm not a big BSer schmoozer guy. I don't attach myself to stuff that I'm not involved. Like, I was just talking about this with a friend earlier. There's a guy, like, when Lowell George died, 2 or 3 of the guys in the band started something else, and this one guy went and played guitar with him. And he always tells everyone, oh yeah, I played guitar in Little Feat. No, you didn't. Like, I can't do that. I don't have that. I don't have the capability to BS people like that. But it does help if you get somebody over in the place and they see it, like, oh, there's, this and this. Okay, well, I guess I can, there's something more concrete for them to take you seriously than your own little hype machine. And it is like, you do kind of have to employ, the squeaky wheel gets the grease in a way where you're not annoying.
Yeah.
And that's simply the sad reality of it.
So true. So true. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the JZ microphone pop filter in front of a mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is JJ Blair, joining us from Los Angeles, his studio Fox Force 5 Recorders. I'm glad I said that right. Are you ready to jam, JJ?
I'm ready to jam.
All right.
I've got my French. I got my whatever English muffin.
Your English muffin, your French press coffee, and your English muffin.
Ready for jam.
Off mic, we briefly mentioned another Casualties of Jazz video that's in the playlist, in the YouTube playlist, Shakedown Street cover. And so I have to ask if you're, is there some Grateful, a Deadhead in you?
I spent the second half of the 80s, following them around.
Nice, man. Got any good stories from those days? I went to 5 shows, so I think that qualifies me, but probably not as much as you.
Yeah, I saw about 100, and I think I learned what I needed to learn, and I left behind what I did. It's funny, if you tell people that you're a Dead fan, it'll cost you gigs. So I kind of have to do it. There's just some of us like we know, and we kind of like do the secret handshake. So right. because they're really misunderstood by a lot of people. A lot of people just hear somebody noodling and singing out of tune, and I don't know.
And their ears just weren't on right.
Yeah. I know someone who went to a show and told me they hated it, and I know what year it was. I knew where it was. I went and I listened, and I was like, oh my God, this was amazing. They're like, well, I had done too much cocaine, I think. I'm like, well, that's the problem. So.
So the secret handshake for me was, checking out in a grocery store aisle, and I had a tie-dye on, and the grocery clerk was like, finished checking, and was like, Iko. And I was like, what?
Yeah, Deadheads can drive me nuts. It's just, they can make it difficult for me, but there is a certain thing to that band and what they did and how they explored music. And, sometimes it was magic and sometimes it was tragic. But what I learned about how to play music, how to listen to music, how to approach music from them, was very influential on me. But it's just one of the many things that I've put in my toolkit over the years. I can take something from that, and then I can take something from like Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks.
Yeah.
And not be stuck in. There's a lot of people who go to jam band land and never get out.
Well, you talked about I just lost the quote that you said, but you said some, essentially some gigs are great and some are terrible.
Yeah, magic or tragic.
Yeah, magic or tragic. I'm pretty sure the Stones gigs were described that way too. So it wasn't just the Grateful Dead. It's just bands that really put it out there and do something unique. Are like that.
Yeah, when you're taking chances and you're trying to create moments, and that's fun. That keeps it exciting, and depending on the level to which you're willing to humiliate yourself, Yeah,
it's
like there's some people who feel like, no, I have to give everyone their money's worth every single night. And they feel the way to do that is to have a very rigid show. And that's very valid also.
Now, I don't know if Springsteen was if his shows were described as rigid in terms of set list, but I've always heard his shows described as like he brought it every single time. Do you think that's true?
Of Springsteen?
Yeah. And I remember seeing him do like the Super Bowl show, and I was like, how in the world did he just do that?
Well, I mean, that guy's an icon for a reason. He is one of the greatest performers of all time. And his music isn't everybody's cup of tea, but what he knows how to connect with an audience. He knows how to control the dynamic and the flow, and build the tension, and release it and break it down, and do it for 3 hours straight, which is unbelievable.
Yeah. So let's pivot to some of these other artists that you've worked with too, because you have such a great list of people. Tell us who Bernard Purdie is, and what is the Purdy Shuffle, and how does that pertain to you in making records?
Okay, well, Bernard Purdie is one of the Bernard Purdie is the hit maker, and he is one of the greatest drummers in history who played on some just fantastic songs. And yeah, he came up with a beat called the Purdy Shuffle, which is it depends on what tempo you're doing it, but the best example of it is Babylon Sisters that he plays on by Steely Dan.
Wow.
Where it's like, and John Bonham copies it on Fool in the Rain. Jeff Porcaro copies it on Rosanna. Those are all influenced by the Purdy Shuffle. And then there's half tempo versions. There's double time versions. There's various tempo versions, but it is just a certain thing that adds movement and groove in a way with those grace notes on the hi-hat, and then some little notes off the snare in between the backbeats. That is it's like just the sexiest beat ever.
And so, Rockstars, there's also a good YouTube video where Bernard Purdie's showing the Purdy Shuffle, and he talks over it while he's doing the whole thing too. And so I think I got the right one, but I threw that in the YouTube playlist as well.
Yeah, he's a character, and he used to. Guys who've worked with him in the 70s told me that he would show up, and he would take 45s of all the number one records he played on, and he would lay them out in front of his kit during the session. And then at the end of the song, he would hold up a banner that said, "You done hired the hit maker, Bernard Purdie."
That's great, man. That's how we should all have attitudes like that about recording in the studio.
Yeah, there's and unfortunately, apparently Atlantic owned the rights to some recording of the Beatles before they got signed to EMI. I think it was My Bonnie or something, and they had him overdub on it after they became popular, so they could put out a single of the Beatles. And so he actually is on a Beatles recording, but for some reason he has convinced himself that he's on all the Beatles records. He is on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band soundtrack that the Bee Gees did, but he's not on any Beatles records.
So Bernard recorded with the Bee Gees. Would he have done that down in?
No. He did not record with the Bee Gees. There's all the tracks that are on that record of that soundtrack. I think they're probably either done here in New York, and I don't know if the Beatles are on it, but it was like a production of. I mean, if the Bee Gees are on it. Like the various songs where the various people do their cameos, like Steve Martin and Alice Cooper and all that.
Mm-hmm.
That band was Bernard Purdie was one of the guys, and I think maybe Chuck Rainey was playing bass, and Chuck played with Bernard on a lot of stuff, including Steely Dan and Aretha Franklin. Really one of the best rhythm sections ever. Just insane.
If Bernard was coming over to record in your studio tomorrow and he was going to play the Purdy Shuffle on something, how would you mic up his drum kit?
Well, first off, he's going to tell you how to mic it up, which is
Okay.
So what he likes to do is he likes, about doing tea towels on the toms, right? Like
Yeah.
Beatles style.
Yeah.
Well, he likes to do a thing that I have discovered and used when I'm trying to do a dead tom, which is you tape a towel across like the top third instead of across the whole thing. And so you can still hit the skin without hitting the towel, but it's dead because of the towel laying on it. And then he will insist that you mic it from underneath, even if it has a double head on it, because he's afraid that he's going to hit the microphone. And it works for some reason. I don't know if that would work if I had the top head live, but it worked. It sounded just fine. And he also likes a China. So you have to, put that into your equation. Other than that,
how do we put that into our equation? Do we find the mute button?
Yeah, well, but there's guys though that, like the guys who come from a jazzy place who play China, they do it a little differently.
Yeah.
The 80s ruined China cymbals for us.
Right. Yeah.
People who had them in big drum cages with double kick drums and stuff like that. There was a way to play those things that is very musical, and 98% of the drummers don't know what that is.
It's my cymbals aren't loud enough.
Here's a funny joke. I used to, I had friends in a band called 11 that I used to work with, and their drummer was Jack Irons, who left to join Pearl Jam, and they were auditioning drummers at my studio, and they would come and use their kit. And I suggested that we put a China on a stand in the corner, and if the drummer reached for the China, he automatically lost the gig.
Did it work?
We decided against it, but everyone had a good laugh.
Nice, man. All right. So Purdy Shuffle. So what about the rest of the kit? Would there be an overhead? Would there be a mono, a stereo? What would you do for something like that?
Well, if I'm recording him, it's probably going to be a dry, tight funk sound. So I'm probably not going to go with room mics. I tend to do a Glenn Johns style isosceles triangle type thing, which is, one directly over the snare pointed down, and then the same distance from the center of the snare, slightly over and above the tom, pointed at that same place. And you pan those hard left and hard right, and that gives you a perfect left to right snare-centric image. And the way that I do it, with a little touch of compression and EQ, I never need to spot mic anything else in terms of cymbals.
Nice.
I will do that, and I have certain producers who are, of course, drummers who like, can you spot mic the ride? I'm like, okay, if you want, I will. But I never wind up needing it. I always have plenty of ride in that situation.
So is the tom mic higher than the top of the ride in this situation, or is it down low, sort of below the ride?
Well, in the Bernard situation, it's underneath the bottom.
I said the tom mic. What I mean is the Glenn Johns overhead that's on the tom side. The floor tom.
Let me see. I'm looking at one right now, and it's kind of a little bit, couple inches beneath, and yeah, it depends. I mean, sometimes you got somebody with a bunch of toms and a bunch of cymbals, and I have to go a little higher to capture everything. There's a video of the Who doing "Who Are You" in the studio, and Glenn Johns has that set up. You can just see there's one right over on the side because Mooney has all his toms and all his cymbals.
Well, I'll have to find that.
In that kind of situation. But yeah, it's just sort of one of those things that you take a guess what's going to work, and then you listen and you see if anything feels out of balance. And then as with everything you record, big hint to everyone who wants to learn how to record, anytime you record anything in stereo, always check it in mono. So you check your mono compatibility between the two mics. And you listen, and like I said, it should give you a perfect left to right image of the whole kit. And then as long as the phase is playing nicely together, and you can flip the polarity on your tom mics to listen for whether the low end goes away or not. You can sneak in tom mics as well. You don't have to. It's a great technique to not have to close mic toms and even the snare. But, I like to close mic everything so that I can get that immediate impact that people expect on most modern records.
Nice. And I did find that Who Are You video. And so that is now on the playlist too. I'm feeling rather ninja with my internet skills live on this podcast right now.
I'm impressed, Liz.
It's a new strategy for me. Stare at a computer screen while I'm talking to you. Okay, cool. So let's take it to the next. Let's talk about the kick drum for a sec. What are smart moves for miking up that kick drum in that scenario, and what are some dumb things to do?
Well, the first and most important thing with any drum is to know that most drummers don't know how to tune. It's just like they're not like, or that they know how to set up their drum for a live situation, but they don't really know what constitutes a good sounding drum in the recording studio.
Right.
And one of the reasons that I think I have a reputation for getting great drum sounds is I know how to start with making a drum sound good. So when you have a kick drum, there's very much has to do with having the right head, tuning it the right way. Baffling inside is huge. There's two things. If you don't, depending on the type of music, if there's a lot of overhang and the note sort of, like Bonham could get away with it because of the way the arrangements on the Zeppelin songs were, but you can't always have that kick drum hang out as long, sustain wise, because it messes with the bass instrument and other things. So you have to make sure that you are tuning the drum accordingly. Here's a weird thing too. I don't like kick drums that are deeper than 14 inches, which is like the standard historic size. All these DWs and Craviatos that are all like much deeper, I find them to be a little bit of a pain in the butt, especially when I start putting more than one mic on. I think 14 inches is like the perfect depth for recording.
So that's not the size of the drum, or that's not the width of the drum, that's the depth of it.
The depth, yeah. So, you can use a 20, you can use a 24 or 22, 26, whatever. Like that's going to have a certain thing. And then every drum will have like the pitch that is right on that. And of course, everything is song dependent. But so what I like to do is I think when I started out, I used to put an RE20 like right up on the beater, right? I'd poking through the hole, and then I eventually got into AKG D12s, not the D12 VR, but the original ones, which are sort of my favorite kick drum mic. And I wound up putting them just barely inside the hole, and I felt I got more bass that way, and that smack that you get from putting it right on the beater, I just give it some 12K on a 1073, and that would give me that same immediacy of having it right on the beater. And then the benefit to that was now when I put a FET 47 or something outside, the front of the head, or the outside head there, I have fewer phase issues to deal with than if that inside mic's a foot away or something like that. So
right. So the inside is closer to the same plane as the FET 47 outside. No.
Correct. And then and now I'm dealing with not so much is it canceling, but it's like, okay, what frequency is it building up at when I combine the two? And I can just move it an inch or two to sort of, comb filter through the frequencies where I'm getting constructive interference. And I'm like, okay, it's a little too much at like 200 hertz. I want to feel it more at like 100 hertz. And you just start to move the relationship of those two mics away from each other. And that frequency buildup will move accordingly.
Okay, very cool. Thank you for getting into the details on the drum miking there. I will throw one other drummer at you because I have
by
to.
the way, I will throw this out there.
Sure.
Warren Hewitt has produced like a pro academy, and I have a course that I teach on there.
Oh, great.
Where I teach phase fundamentals in specifically relating to having more than one mic on something. And then I also go through and show how to use that and to mic and EQ and compress drums when you're tracking.
Very cool, man. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. I'm a huge fan of using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice right now in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription options. For only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Let me ask you about another drummer because I have to. Zigaboo, Modeliste. How does he get that sound? So Zigaboo, and why do we know him? Who does he play with?
Ziggy's in the meters.
Yep.
And also, you know, they did a lot of great work with Robert Palmer that we know, with where the meters were his backing band on that.
Really? Which stuff? Like the stuff from the 80s?
Every Kind of People. And there's stuff on Sneak and Sally Through the Alley. That's the meters.
Nice.
Yeah. And then it's the meters and Bernard. That's
right.
on that record. But yeah, they did, they farmed out for a few people. But those records that sound is, it's like a feat of taking not great recording equipment in a not great environment and making it really musical and having a distinctive sound. That's the sound of Sissy Strut and all that stuff.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
clanginess. And I'm sure he's hitting the rim on the snare. It's just very metallic.
Gained probably having mic pre's pretty hot too, so that you get a lot of sensitivity.
It sounds kind of distorted. You don't, who knows? It could be however they had the tape machine set up. You don't know at what part of the chain that is overmodulating, but something's definitely overmodulating. There's some distortion going on there.
Yeah.
It's definitely compressing and overmodulating and just all kinds of weird distortion going on. But it's so musical and it is the signature of those records, and particularly it works with his playing style.
I remember when I discovered the meters, I was just blown away. I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe this exists. To me, this is the definition of funk and groove and, wanting to play something in the pocket.
And it's funny because our first exposure to the meters was probably hearing James Gang Funk Number 49, which was them trying to do a meters type thing.
Interesting.
And it doesn't, and that we just didn't know.
Yeah.
And then if you go now listen to the meters, now go listen to that tune and go like, I see what they were doing.
Interesting. Yeah. And then, hearing Zigaboo's drum sound, my first thought as a young recording engineer is like, oh, how do you get that sound? And then years later, there was was it the Grammys that did a series of videos where they paired old school, different artists and bands with DJs to like do remix things. And so they put one of these together down in New Orleans, and Zigaboo was in there, and the video camera guy was just walking around with the video camera mic in the room as they were just, as he sat down on the kit to say, oh, glad to be here. Nothing was even mic'd up. And it immediately sounded exactly like a meters record, like Zigaboo. And it was that moment for me where I was like, okay, I get it now.
Well, sometimes it's just people's touch, and the way they hit something. Like I've worked with James Gadson a lot, and James was the house drummer for 70s Motown for so much stuff. He was Bill Withers' drummer. That's him on Use Me and a number of things. And it does not matter who is recording him or what drum kit he is using. There is a way that he hits a tom that always sounds like him. He just has a certain touch, and you can always tell it's him by the way he hits the tom. And it's like the damnedest thing, It doesn't matter if it's a concert tom or a regular tom. He hits it, and it's like, oh, it's that weird James thing,
Nice. All right. So you've done a lot of different records, so I'm going to start jumping around on some things. I've Got a Right to Be Blue, Reese Winans and Friends, with Keb Mo. Tell us about that session. How did you get such an incredibly genuine old school sound out of it? Was it you taking advantage of this great mic locker that you've got, using old mics, tapes, filters?
We were at Ocean Wave for that, and that was, let me see, they had a big Neve 8078 console. We're going to Pro Tools, and I was given my Joe Bonamassa's producing, and I was just given my marching orders of what's it going to sound like. And as I recall, I think there were a couple mics that weren't necessarily in use, and I'm like, I'm going to leave that open, and that just sort of has a vibe,
Mm-hmm.
And I believe Reese was playing an upright. And yeah, I just, I try to do everything, and this is especially more true now that I record to digital 99.99% of the time. I try to make everything sound like a record on the way in, rather than when I used to go to tape, I'd go get kind of a neutral sound and then try to make the magic happen when I was mixing. Well, now, especially because, as in the case with that record, I didn't get to mix it. Sometimes it's other people mixing. I try to make sure that I put the intended sound that I think is correct for that production on the way to tape. So someone's locked into my vision of it. They're going to love me or hate me for it, but that's, I'm like, hey, you're letting me make this decision. I'm setting it in stone. So you're stuck with this. And that's kind of what happened on that tune. I want to let the people who are doing the performance hear that particular vibe, which is going to influence their performance, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, when you're trying to perform and you just have a very flat, lifeless thing, it's hard to get into character. It's like it's like trying to act with a green screen, right?
Right.
It's but if
so many people are doing that now too, right?
Yeah, I know that. But if you're, if you're really standing in the pantheon, and it's a little easier to get in character.
Yeah.
And that's and I sort of feel that way. And that's one of the things that Bonamassa has said to me in particular that he likes working about me was that working with me is that when they're tracking, it sounds like a record and it's really easy for them to perform. And that just kind of goes with my philosophy of I'm just trying to, come up with something that works at that moment and which in the end I think makes it easier to mix. If you ever get any of the real multi-tracks of some of the songs we know and love that we grew up on, you just push those faders up and that sounds like the song.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the way things used to get done. And the more that we were given 8 million tracks to work with and got to table decisions, people got away from that. And I like to get back to that and take advantage of, having that console and all that outboard gear and all those mics on my way into digital, which really doesn't have a sound.
So I've got a dumb joke for you, but I wrote down, keep your pantheon. JJ's going to bring the rock. But anyway, but we'll get away from my dumb jokes and we'll go back to how do you get a committed sound? So when I think of things like, getting people to play the right instrument, that's a great place to start. Choosing the right mic, because if you choose the wrong mic, it's too bright and harsh or whatever. And then compression and pre's feels like another place to make good choices. But what about the console? How should we be thinking about using a console to help get some of that on the way into a Pro Tools world? Because I think of that console as happening after Pro Tools.
Well, it depends on the console. So you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of that console. So every console has, has a sound, it has headroom limitations. There are various things that people like to push certain consoles. Some consoles you can't push because they collapses. But and then EQs all have their own tonal variations. So like an API is going to sound different than a Neve in terms of the EQ section, for instance. So for instance, I know that 3K point that I like on a Trident, like we talked about, not necessarily going to be there on an API. It's not going to do that same thing. It's going to have a wider Q.
But is it there like just on the direct out from the board going straight to Pro Tools, or is it kind of only there when you start mixing things through the stereo bus and hear it that way?
No, it's there on the direct out.
Okay.
And I'm bussing, and I may be bussing certain things together. Like I put 3 mics on a snare and I don't print 3 different snare tracks. I bus them and make one snare track. That's, I commit to that sound.
And that's because Bernard told you better put these 3 mics on my snare.
No, that's because I saw Brendan O'Brien do it years ago and I tried it and I was like, oh, that works.
Nice.
And he's a pretty good engineer.
Of course, now you're going to have to tell us what those 3 mics are.
For me, it's this isn't what he used. He used 57s, and I think he had a 441 on the bottom. I use a D19 on the top, an AKG D19. I use a 57 on the side, pointing at the shell, and then I put a 441 underneath, pointing at the strainers.
I love it. I've never tried that before. What a cool tip.
And the 441's nice because it has a lot of low end, and it's very directional, so it cuts down on the bleed. And if I'm somewhere that has a second 441, maybe I'll put that on the side because of the directionality of it. You get a lot of bleed off of 57 on the top, and I started using these crash guard things on the side and top one, and I think they help a little bit to keep the hi-hat out of the snare mics. especially because I like to compress the snare when I mix.
Nice.
That can, that leakage can be a pain in the butt. So yeah, in terms of the console though, back to that, it just really depends on which one you have, and if you have outboard stuff accessible. And the main thing is, I always try to stress to people is to know thy gear.
Know thy gear.
And know gear in general, because you don't want to be the thing slowing down the session. You want somebody to either tell you, hey, can you get this sound for me? And you got to know, like, oh yeah, it's going to be this into this into that and that, and that's going to get me that sound. Because you dicking around going from piece to piece to piece, shooting it out, the energy and the creativity is getting lost. It's bleeding dry while you are getting a sound. So I think it's so important to be fast and to have reliable instincts for how to get a sound, and to know immediately, like, this isn't quite it, but I can work with it, or this isn't it. Can you give me 1 second to change something?
Yeah.
And not in every case, sometimes it's not. You have to know when the vibe's there and you're going to kill the vibe to change stuff, and you got to come up with a plan B on the fly.
And hopefully you're pushing your own boundaries enough that you may hit points where you actually don't know this gear combo 100% yet. So like you said, you got to know, I can just make it work. I don't need to try 5 things.
I'll give you an instance. I had never used a complex compressor. I know what songs have complex compressors on them and generally what they do, and I had a sort of rough idea, but I needed to put a piano on this thing. And I was like, let me just try that, because I know they're weird. I know they do weird stuff. And boy, I dialed in this piano sound that on its own was like, what the hell is that? But I knew just the way that I was able to tailor the compression characteristics, it is the standout of that track. It just cuts through and does its own weird thing. Again, soloed, it's like, geez, that's an awful piano sound. but in the track, it is the star of the track.
And the complex is that like the Dynamite Gain Brain? Or is it a different one?
No, the complex is When the Levee Breaks. It's the drums on When the Levee Breaks.
Ah, all right.
Which, by the way, going back to that intention of, they got that sound when they were tracking. That song would not sound like that if they just did that flat. Like, that was a sound that they came up with. And that's, it wasn't just like, hey, let's get a drum sound, and after the fact, I'm going to mix it. Oh, and that's what it's going to sound like. That's a very intentional sound that they went into. So that's, in terms of that philosophy, and that was exactly how I approached that song on Reese's record that you're talking about. And then on another record that Joe produced that just came out last weekend, the Joanna Connor record, he really wanted me to get some very aggressive, different sounds that, were reminiscent of the vibe of Hound Dog Taylor, which are just really just bad, crunchy records, right? They're just what you don't want to do in terms of fidelity, but all kinds of vibe. And so I had to have those marching orders and go like, okay, how can I approach this differently and really make something trashy and grindy and powerful, and not, and still sound appropriate for a modern record. And that was an interesting challenge in that thing, but that was definitely a specific intention I had to have when tracking, not just like, okay, I'm going to do my standard thing and then I'll figure it out when we mix. I would not have been able to get those sounds if I did that.
And what's the title of that one again? I'll make sure it goes in our playlist.
It is, it's an address. So so I can never remember. Hold on.
And the artist was, say the
Joanna
artist.
Connor.
Joanna.
And Connor. It is called,
I got it right there.
Hold on a second.
We got a
It's called
4801 South Indiana Avenue.
Yes, there you go.
I'm fast.
Hey Siri, give me directions to 4801 South Indiana Avenue.
Getting directions to 4801 Indiana Avenue, Lackenbyada, Flinders.
No, we don't want to go to that.
We're keeping it live, rock stars. This is real deal on the podcast today. So I just put that in the playlist too, so you can check it out. Rock stars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. Let's keep pivoting quickly. Would you like me to ask you a question about Rod Stewart next, or Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash?
Well, let's save the best for last. So let's do Rod Stewart.
All right, great. It's a pretty damn good record. What was it like working with Rod Stewart? How did you record and mix his voice as well as the other instruments on the #1 Billboard Hot 100 record, Great American Songbook Volume 3?
The stuff that I did, there were several producers on those records, and the stuff that I did with Richard Perry, actually Carter Humphrey mixed those songs. The stuff that I tracked, we sort of split between myself, Carter, and Bobby Kennedy. I think his name was Bobby Kennedy, believe it or not. And nice. Let's see. I had guys scattered all over the house, and Rod was very into the blue bottle at the time. I think with the champagne capsule, that was the sound that he was into at that moment. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going through a 1073 into an LA2A. And, he's just got an amazing voice. It's just, it's one of those things where you're standing next to, I remember, I'll never forget the first time we're in my living room and he picked up one of my guitars and he started playing, I don't remember which Faces song it was. And then he started singing and I'm like, it's that sound.
I bet it was Maggie, right?
No.
Oh, that's later.
No, it was like Handbags and Glad Rags or something like that. I don't remember. But I go, it's that sound. It's coming out of that guy. That sound that I know, that I grew up with, that's in my head. It's coming out of that guy's mouth. He's standing right here. It's like a freaky moment,
Wow.
And I've had that happen over and over with various musicians who's like have a fucking signature that I know. And then there it is. They're doing it. It's coming out of that person.
I remember discovering that a little bit myself and thinking that it was the mic choice and the whole mic sound until you hear their voice on a mic and you realize it's coming out of their voice, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, and those are, and a lot of people like that, you just have to find the mic that works for them and the mic that fits inside the music. Some mics sort of betray characteristics of certain people's voices, mm-hmm. and some mics will not sound that. A mic that might sound great on somebody in one song may not be the right mic inside of another song. So there's always context. But there were only a couple things that we cut live. A lot of that record was done with a stunt vocalist that was the assistant to the producer who was a good singer and could do a good Rod impression.
Wow.
And because Rod just wasn't around for that, and the way that record was done was there were like 2 or 3 teams of producers competing for which version would wind up on the record. They were all vying for Clive Davis's favor.
Wow.
And so we would cut it, he wouldn't necessarily be here for that one. And then once it was decided whose was going to wind up on it, then Rod would come in and he would also listen to, because those are standards. You have to learn those melodies. And sometimes he did. And he would study the song and then he would come in and take a couple passes at it and hopefully sing the melody accurately.
Nice. So I guess I have a somewhat mutual Rod Stewart story. My console in my studio is a custom-built MCI console. That's the one I've had in there for 15 years. And Do You Think I'm Sexy was tracked on that, apparently.
Nice.
So that's the beginning and end of my story. I wasn't there for the session. I can't tell you anything more about it.
Phil Chen on bass, Carmine on drums. I've heard the masters for those. My buddy Brion Q, who works with with the Who, he also works for Warner Brothers and Rhino a lot, and going through the collections and doing mixes for the box sets and everything. So I got to hear the masters when he was mixing outtakes of that, and the song was simply called Disco.
Nice. Well,
I think it was just a clear, like, we're going to sell out and do some disco.
And it was done at Criteria, that was like Disco Central back then too.
Speaking of humidity.
I don't know if you recorded the rest of it, but the other thing I noticed about the Great American Songbook was just really, really great, smooth, just rich sounding horns and mellow strings. And I wondered if you had anything to do with that, or if you wanted to talk about some of your approaches.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a sour grape story.
All right, you go do it.
For the horns, a lot of the horns on the stuff that we did was Lee Thornburg, who's wonderful and has played with everybody from Tower of Power to you name it. He's actually in Joe's band, in Bonamassa's band.
Nice.
And I can't remember the saxophone player's name, but Bill something or other. Anyway, regardless, the horns were all done on the Korg analog velvet patch.
Nice.
And then they hired a big expensive string date at Capitol to replace that. And Clive Davis wound up liking the Korg analog velvet. So that's mostly what's on the record. And they threw all that money away. It was very strange. A lot of choices that I didn't quite understand on that record. The main thing, and the one opinion I won't keep to myself was, the thing was, and Clive was quoted saying this. He said, "I don't want Satchmo or Billie Holiday. I want Fred Astaire." And what that meant was he wanted to be like the most boring white bread version. And anything that we did that sounded remotely cool got shot down. And so everything had to become the most dumbed down, most white bread pop version, or Hostess Twinkie version, I think is what I called it, of those particular standards to get Clive's approval. Now, I don't know. I'm not a gazillionaire record label executive, but my thought was, with the amount of promotion and everything that went into it and Rod Stewart's voice, you could have done the other thing and sold to all the housewives who found this crap accessible. So there were some much, much more interesting versions of those songs that got cut and never made it on the record, which I found sad. So it's hard for me to sort of listen to the record and not go, oh man, there was this version of Stardust that just made me cry, and it's lost, So that's what it's like working on a big corporate pop record. Is you got label people making these decisions rather than people, because they're trying to think about who's going to buy it, who they can sell it to, rather than what's good music.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard versions of songs before that I thought were just incredibly moving that didn't make the cut. I had a roommate here who had recorded a duet with Patty Griffin and Robert Plant. And when he played it for me, I was like, dude, this is your number one work, you know? And then later, you know, somebody just decided it wasn't quite right. And they moved on and kept working on it. And so it never saw the light of day. So I understand that.
Yeah.
But moving forward, let's see. Why don't you share a story about working with Johnny and June Carter Cash?
Well, sort of one of the all-time highlights of my career.
Are you glad we waited this long to talk about it?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Simply because of that situation and being given that opportunity and being so young and being thrown into the fire of the really not ideal situation to make that record. My friend Vicki Hamilton, who she was like Guns N' Roses' original manager. They were like sleeping in her house, you know, when they got their deal. And then she became an Interscope person. And then she started her own little label. And Rick Rubin told her, hey, you should sign June Carter Cash. So she did. And she asked me if I'd engineer it with, originally the idea was to have Nick Lowe produce it. And it was going to be Nick Lowe on bass and Rodney Crowell and Marty Stewart playing, all of whom are former son-in-laws of June. So it was going to be June Carter and the ex-son-in-laws. But Nick backed out, which I was disappointed because I wanted to work, you know, I'm such a huge fan of him and particularly the Elvis Costello records that he produced.
Yeah.
I am just, you know, that is so much of my inspiration. But they said, well, why don't you and John Carter Cash produce and then you mix it? And I was like, great. And John Carter worked on, you know, he picked the musicians, worked on the arrangements, and basically everything on the technical side was left up to me. And we recorded it in a log cabin on their property with everybody sitting in a sort of circle, which was, you know, not an ideal way to record, especially since I'm working on headphones in the same room as them, trying to listen back on speakers with all the same sonic anomalies of that room happening in the speakers. So it isn't until I get back to a real studio and I'm like, whoa, where's, you know, what's up with like the 8 extra decibels of, you know, 130 hertz.
And this is right here in Tennessee in a log cabin?
Yes, in Hendersonville. John Carter Cash still has the cabin, and he's expanded it into a bigger facility now. And he's been doing tons and tons of stuff. He's really a busy dude. He's recorded several hundred Loretto and songs, and
wow.
So yeah. Anyway, and just a sweetheart, wonderful guy, but he didn't know a whole lot about recording at the time, so that all got thrown onto me. And he was more, you know, and look, you got Marty Stewart, you got Norman Blake, you got Rodney Crowell, and then Dave Rowe and Rick Lonau were the rhythm section. And like, what are you going to do arrangement wise? You guys are going to tell these guys what to play? It's like, no, this is, you know, they grew up playing this stuff. They know what they're doing. It's just my job to capture that moment. And that was when I realized what my job really is. My job is to be a historian. Mm-hmm. My job is to capture a moment in time and in some way, shape, or form, transmit the energy of that moment to the listener. And I made my recording ever on that. And it's not my most perfect recording. It's a very flawed recording, but it captures 130% of the vibe in that room at that time. And the circumstances were extremely unideal. And particularly because Johnny was very ill. And I just, I just had to get things up, get the mics up, hit record, and pray nothing went wrong, and pray that it worked and that I made the right choices. And I did. And I got a duet between the two of those that after Johnny had been in a coma for 2 weeks and was extremely weak and had pneumonia, that was a song about a couple singing to each other and one of them dying and the other one going to meet them on the far side banks of Jordan. And that's what the song's called. And it just absolutely kills me every time I hear that. And you can hear all the emotion in it. And that take, there was not a dry eye in the room at the end of it.
Wow.
And it was so heavy. And I think, because everyone, they were all so close knit. I mean, that was a family, everyone in that room had either been touring with Johnny for years or had been married to one of the kids or something. And Rodney's father had just died. So there was a lot of sadness around that. And that was just, a moment in time that I was like, right, this is my job. My job is not to, can I get things to sound as good as Jellyfish or Steely Dan? It's like, no, my job is to capture an emotion and transport people into that time and space of what is happening in that room.
That's wild. Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. Do you remember having this? I mean, you talked about there not being a dry eye. Did you know in that moment, did you have a feeling that that was the one that you had grabbed? That you just captured the take?
Oh, yeah. We knew. I mean, we knew that Johnny was going to have to re-sing because he was a little out of breath. And he did he went into another coma in between us coming back. And then we got the take, the vocal take the next time. But
Wow.
that was the performance. And it's Appalachian, country bluegrass. It's very, going back to that Grateful Dead thing, where they were very influenced by that whole thing. It's everyone's reading off each other and there's a certain amount of improvisation within it and dynamic, and a very live thing. And that was as impossible as it was to record in that cabin, in that situation. I don't know that we would have gotten that vibe in a recording studio. I don't know that everyone would have been as comfortable just sitting around in a circle, without having like the log cabin vibe.
So we're talking about what kind of instruments? We're talking about acoustic, banjo.
No
fiddle,
banjo. I don't know if there's mandolin on that song. There was mandolin on some songs. I don't think there's mandolin on that song. There's several acoustics, upright bass, and
right.
And what is there? There's, I think, Rick just playing brushes on a snare. That's it.
Rick Rubin was.
No, Rick Lonau.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. And then were you, what do I want to ask next? Was this like people using headphones or no, we don't need headphones. We're just going to play.
No, I was the only one with headphones. Everyone was they were just doing live.
So there's that thing where you put a mic in front of them and you just sort of hope that they respect the mic placement a little bit.
Yeah. But they're, look, those are people who've made how many hundreds of recordings, like they know.
Yeah, they get it. Let me pivot. That was an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. There's a couple more things I could go to before we close out. So you quickly mentioned Jellyfish. Tell us about your experience working with those guys.
Well, I didn't work with Jellyfish. I worked with, first off, after Jason left Jellyfish, he started a group with John Brion and Buddy Judge and Dan McCarroll called The Grays. And John wound up living on my couch for about 6 months. And I was like, man, this band is insanely unbelievable. The songs are so good. And Jason and John being two of the finest instrumentalists I had ever encountered at that point.
Yeah.
And I owned a rehearsal studio, and I was like, look, I'm going to front you guys until you get a deal. I'm just going to give you guys carte blanche because I'm a fan and I want to be friends with you guys. And that's kind of the way it turned out. And they got the deal. And then later at another point, I did not remain friends with John, but I remained friends with Jason. And Jason and Roger were going to do a project called TV Eyes with Brian Reitzel, who was playing with Air and Red Cross. And it was sort of a new wave synth poppy sort of thing. And
nice.
They did it here, and I engineered it. And I think my friend Justin, who's married to Nika Costa and does her records, he wound up mixing it. But it was Justin Stanley.
Oh, I know Justin. I met him when I was out there. I actually almost bought a console from him.
Yeah, lovely, lovely guy. Who, when it was funny because at that time when I had first worked with, I was doing a record and Nika was a backup singer back then, and Justin would like call me up and go, hey, what should I get for this or that, and he'd call me up and ask me questions, and then he went on to have this fantastic career, and he's a sweetheart. So, but anyway, so Justin mixed the record, but yeah, that was basically Jason and Roger, who are just both such incredible power pop writers and really, really creative musicians and creative studio wizards. And it was fun to really see synthesizers used in a way that I was unaware of, some real old school techniques.
Yeah.
That made for a really fun record. And I'm still, in fact, I'm supposed to, I just realized it's Monday. I'm supposed to talk to Jason today about something, but
give me the title of that one. I want to make sure that's in the playlist.
It's called TV Eyes.
Okay. I think I have that one.
Yeah.
I'll double check it here for you, Rockstars. Make sure that we got it in the playlist. Cause it's in there. TV Eyes, TV Eyes.
Yeah. And that was fun. And that was another thing where I think it wound up just getting signed to a Japanese label and didn't. I think they were doing something very similar to what bands like the Killers were doing at the time. But I thought, like, God, if only the Killers could write like Jason Falkner, and this should be huge. And it's always just such a crapshoot who's going to wind up promoting your record or not promoting it. And I've seen so many amazing records just go to waste over the years because they were just not properly promoted or intentionally buried and things like that.
Well, we're just waiting for you to create your own Spotify playlist that we can all follow.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I boycott Spotify. I'm very anti-streaming. I have a thing about going on the Apple store and paying my $1.29 and being able to look myself in the mirror when I want to hear a song. So.
Well, if you want, we'll try and include another playlist or, another list of
hey,
where to
you
go
know what?
get
Everyone else can use it. And I have stuff that I make sure winds up on Spotify. Just as a consumer, it's my musical version of being a vegan. It's like, I just need to pay for music that I consume. And that's just sort of my own personal thing. But I'm not like the vegan who guilts people for eating meat. It's like, you want to use Spotify, it's great, it's wonderful. But I will not make a Spotify playlist, however.
So I don't know if you did Jason Falkner's solo record, but I remember getting a copy of that CD, and maybe there was more than one, probably back in the 90s or late 90s or somewhere in there. And it was the first time I heard an artist play what I thought sounded like most of the instruments on their own record. And
all of them.
Yeah. And I recognized there was a tightness to the way it all went together when one person plays all the instruments, which contrasts with the built-in looseness that a band can have by playing together. And I just remember being really struck by that. It was the first time I realized that there's a difference between those two things.
Well, I never recorded any of his solo records. I mastered 2 of them, which is a funny story. And but Jason is a musical and production genius, and he just is thinking on a completely next level. And I think, even the demos will have that tightness. Like, he's thought it all out. So there may be a little bit of a couple moments built in here or there for improvisation, but it's pretty much all thought out. And this is interesting, how I was talking about how certain bands, they want to go out and sort of let it hang out, and other bands, they want to be like really tight and do a repeat performance. So you had John Brion is an next level musical genius, improvisational genius who can sort of pull anything out of his ass. And so can Jason. And it would make for their live shows for the Grays were just amazing. But when the record came out and they wanted to tour, that was that thing. Like Jason was thinking from where his background was, like, hey, we got a product here. We got to promote this record. Let's do a tight thing. And then John was like, no, let's keep doing our loosey-goosey improvisational thing. And that is interesting to see those two things. It was just 2 different ways of thinking. And I remember that was, an issue that they came up against. But I only bring that up because we talked about those 2 approaches to live shows. Sure,
yeah. Now, the record that I found it's Presents Author Unknown in 96. So I don't know if that was one of yours or a different one.
No, I didn't. No, that's not. That's
okay. No worries.
I think Hugo Nicholson did that, maybe. I don't know, but that's he's great record. But Jason's just one of my favorites, and he's a really. That guy will do more with a 57 and a Tascam 4-track than most people can do with a full recording studio.
Yeah.
he just has such a really great sense of how to make something musical and exciting sounding. And I just can't speak highly enough of him as a recording artist.
That's fantastic. I've known some people like that. And I'm always so amazed when I'm around somebody who can just come up with a brilliant idea on their own like that. We're at the end of the show, JJ. And that's not how I sign off. But
is that it's not an oncoming train, I see.
But I've got another question for you. And this one, if there's anything we didn't talk about yet, feel free to just pivot straight to that. Otherwise, I go to our classic hypothetical closing question for you, which is we get to take the Wayback Studio machine and you go find young JJ, who's maybe still touring with the Grateful Dead, but started thinking about making records for a living. And you go and You go up to yourself and you say, Iko, dude. Hey, here, I brought a hacky sack. You want to hack for a sec? And then then you say, listen, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. And also, here's how you do like the behind the neck hacky sack move. What advice would you go back in time and give yourself if you could?
First off, don't forget to floss.
Right. You mean the floss that comes from Montana that Frank was singing about?
Exactly. Right. Mental floss.
Yeah.
I would, I think it's important to always keep an open mind and always be exploring new ways to do things. And I mean, the most important things for me are to be quick and reliable and transparent and let other people do their thing without me being in the way. But in terms of me being able to make stuff that where I, allow myself to keep trying new things and growing and don't get stuck in any type of rigid thinking. I just see people get stuck in rigidity about this is how you do stuff. It has to be done this way. No, you have to go to tape, dude. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that's, the most important thing is always the song and the performance and just getting a recording that's musical. But it's the song and the performance, and keep that as the thing that you're trying to serve when you're doing your job, and you'll probably get called back again to work again.
Nice. Well, dude, thank you so much for hanging with us on the podcast, man. What a pleasure it is to meet you and to hear all these stories.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was super fun.
We didn't even get to talk about our mutual friend Matt Boudreau, who said the nicest things about you before I did this interview.
I love Matt.
Let the rock stars know where should they go find you online? Where can they go learn more about you? If they need to just produce their next hit record, where do they go find out?
Well, I have a website called jjblairrecording.com that I don't really update, but you can find me there and you can contact me through it. I am on Instagram actively. I'm maybe addicted to Instagram, which is at jjblair. I think it's j.blair.com. There'll be a link. And Facebook's really sort of more for my personal stuff, but IG is a good place to find me. And I'm always posting either studio stuff or guitar stuff or snowboarding stuff. And that's kind of...
Snowboarding. Oh, cool, man. Well, that'll be the next interview.
Yeah.
All right, man. Dude, thanks so much, man. What a pleasure. Again,
thank you, Ledge.
I look forward to meeting you in person, and hopefully we'll have our winter NAMM back or something like that soon.
I'm going to be back in your neck of the woods in April.
Great. That'll be before this comes out, so it'll be like time travel all over again.
Yeah, so we can we'll get together for a burger.
All right, groovy, man, groovy. Thanks, dude. Great to chat with you. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free trial subscription to get access to all their plugins. Or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.